Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a dumb Karen trespassed on my private property to have a massive illegal barbecue. She ended up assaulting me when I told her to leave. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. The first one starts like this. If there's one thing we Brits love more than anything, is having a good old family barbecue when the weather is nice. This is mostly because the weather never used to be nice enough to be able to have regular barbecues, so when we get the chance to, we go full ham on it. And I suppose they mean that literally. Not meaning to boast, but kind of have to tell the story. So I was close to retirement, and I had enough money saved up to buy a house way out in the country, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. I swapped out polluted air for fresh country air. What they don't tell you is that fresh country air most of the time smells like manure. The house I got was a farmhouse with a barn conversion for the garage and a huge scope of land that incorporated a river at its far side. It was a great fishing spot. On a lovely spring day, I could sit out on that riverbank and watch the kayakers, boaters and whatnot drift by. It was picturesque to say the least. The only downside was that the huge field that was my back garden also had a side entrance. The previous owner never bothered maintaining the gate, which was half fallen off and dumped in the hedgerow. This meant that dog walkers were always wandering though, thinking they could let their dog bound through without a problem. I put up a sign saying no public right of way, but people have a very nasty habit of suddenly turning blind anytime they came across that side entrance. "Oh my, apologize," they would say. "I didn't see the sign there." How convenient for them. Most of the time it would be dog walkers and prospecting picnickers that would stop by, and I would have to ask them very politely to leave. But one weekend when I had to run out to work on a Saturday, the very worst of the worst decided to pitch up in my garden. It had been a beautiful sunny summer's day, and as I said before, when the sun comes out in England, there's only one thing we like to do, which is having a barbecue. I wish that I could say that when I came home from work, my family had gotten the barbecue up and running and in full sway. Well, someone had a barbecue up and running and in full sway, but it was not my family. So I came home from work sometime late into the afternoon, and as I'm pulling up into the driveway, I can see thin wisps of smoke out in the back garden. At first I was shocked and rather worried. I thought that maybe a fire had broken out in the backfield or something. I scrambled out of the car, phone already out and in my hand, but before I had the phone up to my ear, I can already hear noises of merriment. I honestly don't know how to describe the feeling I was feeling when I turned the corner and I see a family of Karens and Kyles in my back garden messing around and enjoying a typical British barbecue. There were hot dogs and burgers everywhere. A couple of the Kyles were arguing over whether the chicken was cooked, and several children were running around and causing mischief. I approached them and they seemed almost to completely blank me as they sang along out of tune to the music, but once I had fully infiltrated the group, they seemed to suddenly notice a stranger in their midst. "Oh, excuse me, this is a private party," a Karen piped up. "Well, that's okay, because this is private land," I replied. This certainly put a dampener on the mood, as several Karens and Kyles now started to congregate to find out what all the building fuss was about. I felt like I was being circled by wolves or sharks. Their entitlement was like a pheromone that sparked all the others into action. We started to get into a little debate about who had right of way and who should be leaving. So I informed them that this is my land and there's a sign up that even states as much by the gate. They would have had to drive past it when they brought their cars in. "Really don't see any sign," a Kyle grumbled. Of course he didn't, they rarely ever do. "I've been having barbecues here for years," a Karen says. I singled this one out as the matriarch of the herd of entitled Karens and Kyles. That was a new one on me, but then I have no grounds in which to call her a liar. Maybe she was the one that broke down the fence in the first place, and the previous owner, the one I bought the house from, simply did not have the guile to stand up to an entitled Karen, but I was having none of it. That may be the case, but I've recently bought the house and the property, and I don't wish to have random people having barbecues on my land. I tried to be as polite as possible, and they were understandably upset, seeing as they were mid-barbecue and all. Had they been polite in return, I would happily have let them finish their party and move on, but no, the head Karen decided that she was gonna make a fuss out of it all. "We have just been coming here for years, and we're not gonna stop just because you said so." I was quite surprised at how quickly she went on the offensive. I tried to be a reasonable person, but the second I realized there was gonna be no talking this Karen down, I decided it was time to bring out the big guns. I'm more than happy for you to stay for another couple hours, but you cannot come back here, okay? It is private property, and if I see you in my garden again, I will have to call the authorities. Honestly, that was such a bad mistake. I quickly came to realize that Karens and Kyles hate it when you use their own tactic against them. The head Karen flew off the handles and brought out her prodders and proceeded to jab me in the chest with her finger. "How dare you threaten to have us arrested?" she was screeching. The rest of the brood swung into action, some in support of the head Karen, others trying to get the head Karen to calm down. I now have a gaggle of Karens and Kyles around me, there are kids crying somewhere, and all the while, the head Karen is desperately trying to stab me some more with her finger. "How dare you?" she was shouting. "I'm a mother of 5 and you wanna send me to prison for having a family barbecue." "No, I don't want you having your family barbecue in my back garden." It went back and forth for about an hour, but eventually the head Karen calms down a little and I'm able to escape and call the police. 2 officers eventually make it over to my house. It takes a little while because I'm out in the middle of nowhere, but as soon as they come, I show them around to the back, and this is when the head Karen really kicks off seeing me coming around with the police. The 2 officers give each other a look and one of them gets on the radio and immediately calls for backup. I was expecting paddy wagons, riot control, the flying squad, that's what we call our armed officers in the UK, but in a matter of minutes there are a large number of officers pulling into my garden. They must have called a code Karen or something. The head Karen makes a beeline for me and she is ranting so hard her face is bright red. "How dare you? You've ruined my family barbecue and we don't get to see each other very often," and so on. The police officer is doing his best to calm her down, but I had the distinct feeling that he was only getting Karen even more riled up. Then I say it, the worst thing I could have said. "Well, you shouldn't have started on me then." And bam! Next thing I know, my face is stinging so hard that when my vision comes back, Karen is on the floor and the police officer on top of her, slapping the handcuffs on. When it's all done and dusted, I give my statement and the police officer asks me if I wanna press charges and I'm like, most bloody definitely. All the Kyles and Karens get escorted from my property, some of them even get arrested for starting something with the police. At the end of it all, after the court hearing, they are fined for trespass and destruction of personal property, from where they had made a mess that they didn't clean up on account of being arrested and forced from my garden. The head Karen is charged with aggravated assault, and while it was only a minor infraction, she still ended up doing some time. With the money I got from the Karens and Kyles, I was able to plant a rather large prickle bush to stop any more deviants from stepping into my garden, and the head Karen was slapped with a restraining order to boot. And here, ripe stars, I hope this Karen never bothers OP again. It is just outrageous the level of entitlement some people reached. Anyway, if you enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment because that would help me tremendously. Either way, the next one is titled "Break the Law and Get Destroyed." I used to work as a spare parts estimator for a fairly niche industry. My job was essentially to work out what parts of our main product the customer wanted, find out how much it would cost us to make, add a little markup and send them a quote. My boss was pretty strict on traceability, so everything needed to be recorded, including why a certain markup had been applied to a particular product. Normal value of these quotes is somewhere between £200 and a few $100,000. Very rarely do we get orders for anything more than that, once or twice a decade in my experience, so a request for a quotation landed on my desk when I was working from home during the pandemic, and it was a biggie. Just looking at the list of parts the customer wanted, this was gonna be an absolute killer, over £1 million all by itself. I was told by the sales guy that if this one went well, there was another one to follow of an even bigger size, ultimately looking at 10 million over the next 4 years. So I set to work. Normally I can do 5 or 6 of these quotes in a day, but this one quote took me 6 weeks to put together. I was in constant contact with 20+ vendors, getting specifications, technical details, prices and lead times for over 400 items. Finally, my masterpiece was complete. Then came the snag. Sales guy then says that because of the country this customer is in, they need to have 4 or more quotes in from different customers in order to get it cleared by their government, some anti-corruption policy that had been instituted. We were the OEM of the product and there's nowhere else on the planet they could get these parts from. So we would have to work through third parties to get it done, and he knew just the guy. In comes a one-man band with a dodgy-looking entry at company's house to save the day. Sales guy and him go way back, so he was gonna be the preferential supplier. I was asked to do the normal quote to him and then to bump the prices up by 30% and send it to 3 other companies who had been asking about it, so they would absolutely not get the contract with the end user. I argued the point, saying that the whole purpose of the anti-corruption policy is to prevent situations exactly like this, but I was overruled. The COO of the company now tells me to just do it over a phone call, at which point I request that in writing before I go ahead and do it. Fast forward 2 years and there's still no order been placed. Then I find out through a different sales guy that the one-man band has been put on a blacklist by this country's government over this project, and the other 3 companies have been turned down. And the end user is asking other companies to come in and take our product out and replace it with their own. A huge investigation is called for by senior management, my quote is ripped to pieces and examined in microscopic detail, and the question gets asked, why did you give different prices to these other 3 when you knew it was all to do with anti-corruption? We should fire you. That's millions of pounds of order, you've lost us. Out comes the email from my little black book, on the desk it goes, everyone suddenly gets very quiet and the COO starts packing his desk in a box the next week. So the moral of the story is, if someone tells you to do something borderline illegal, make sure to get it in writing. Wow, this really went crazy, thank you so much. For those asking about the legality of what I did, because of all of the third parties were outside of the country where the anti-corruption policy was in place, I did not personally break any laws. Whilst the anti-corruption policies are in place for the end user, the worst the government can do is put us on a blacklist, so all of our bids in the future are either refused outright or looked at in far more detail than others might be. I did investigate this at the time, and if there were going to be any implications on me that my company wouldn't have been responsible for, it would have been a flat no. I was acting against the intention of the policy, but not expressly breaking it. Don't do something illegal just because your boss told you to. The issue as far as the company was concerned was the lost millions in revenue and the damage to their reputation. The end user is a huge company with contacts and is in a reasonably close-knit industry, people talk. They ultimately wanted a scapegoat to parade in front of the board to explain why the multi-million-pound deal they'd all been talking about for the last 2 years had suddenly vanished. I did also look at OEM angle at the time, but because we are not the only company who makes this type of product, it did not appear to be possible to use this as an exception. The reasoning being that the option existed to replace our system with the competitors. After posting this, I did a bit of research into the final customer, and their VP of Finance did some fairly well publicized jail time a few years back for buying an oil rig for the company at a suspiciously low price. So there was no way we could have been able to convince the government that everything was above board with a direct sale. And the next one is an Am I the A-hole story. So my husband, Daniel for privacy, and I have been married for just under a year, and I love him very much. He has an 8-year-old daughter, Jane for privacy, from his previous marriage, who I love as my own. He has always been respectful and patient, which is part of why I decided to marry him. We met right before the pandemic when he had been recently widowed the year before, so we tried to take things slow. We ended up quarantining together, and after 3 years we decided to tie the knot. The wedding ceremony was everything a girl could dream of, and we have honestly had very few issues in our first year as a couple. It was not until we went to pick up Jane from her summer camp that I started seeing an issue. I went to meet up with him at the front desk and I found him chatting with the camp coordinator, which is all well and good until I overheard what he was saying. He mentioned that, "My wife made me this jacket actually. She was really good at all that sewing stuff." He was referring to his ex-wife, Alyssa for privacy, not me. It bugged me a little, but I brushed it off as a one-time thing, an accident. We don't talk about Alyssa much unless we are around Jane, and even then, he usually refers to her as Jane's mom. I never heard him call her his wife, especially now that we were married. It was not until a week or 2 later that I learned he does this a lot. We were at a get-together with some friends from work and my first time meeting them. It was all good until one of them asked me questions about baseball. I admitted I didn't know much about the sport and he said that was weird because Daniel had mentioned I was really good at the game and even played some in college. It left me very confused. After talking to some more guys, I found out this was a common issue. A lot of them thought that Alyssa and I were the same person because Dan called us both his wife. At this point I got really offended. We had been married for 10 months and he did not even call Alyssa his ex-wife yet. I was super awkward and explaining to people that he still called his ex-wife his wife was utterly humiliating. Especially the amount that he does it, not just 1 or 2 people, but the whole office. When we got home, we had a fight. He said he did not even think about it that way, that since he never divorced Alyssa, he never stopped thinking about her as his wife. He still stands by the fact that Alyssa is his wife, despite how embarrassing it is to explain to people that I'm not his second wife, but rather his new wife, and Alyssa is his ex. I told him that if he was not ready to move on, then he should not have married me. If he cannot commit to being my husband, then he should not get to call me his wife. I spent the next night at my sister's house ignoring his calls, and we recently started to smooth things over by not talking about them, but I can tell that this is gonna be a sore spot in the marriage and I'm trying to desperately save it. And yeah, ripe stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this one. Who is the a-hole and who isn't? Comment number 1, you are the a-hole. Alyssa is not his ex-wife, it's his late wife. If you don't want to have to deal with a late wife and a man's past, don't marry a widower with baggage and try to erase a part of his life. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. That would be confusing and embarrassing also for anyone he's talking to that might not realize she passed away. She is not really an ex-wife since that's usually a divorce, but there's no reason not to refer to her as his first wife and you are the current wife. Edit, actually, late wife and husband is what most widows and widowers use to refer to a deceased spouse. Comment number 3, everyone sucks here, she is his late wife, not his ex-wife. And the next one is titled, Relatives took our hospitality for granted, so I sent them a package back. Long back when we, 28 then, were living in a centrally located metropolitan city, my husband's uncle and family came home for holidays. Now he is the prodigal son of the family and his wife is super entitled, one child elder to us both, but behaved like a teenager. Since I was new in the family, I was not yet in their awe. DH wanted them to feel welcomed and gave them our bedroom. Me and him were relegated to the living room since both the bedrooms were occupied by the family. Now, this would have still been a pleasant visit if they have some penchant for housework. They would not lift a finger and wanted me to cook, clean and whatnot. A couple of days into the visit, Aunt's sister also came to live with us for a while without asking or informing us. They would use the whole house as if it were theirs and would talk to me only when they needed food or coffee or such. After a week when they left, I discovered the ladies left their clothes, used innerwear included, in our bathroom. The child had stuffed empty packets of stevia over my kitchen counter. I was furious. And packed everything to show my mother-in-law. She is a sweet lady though. Before I could meet my mother-in-law, we were informed that the uncle was coming back and would stay with us for a couple of days before going back. I had the package ready and I decided to return all their stuff, empty packets, used underwear, everything. It ended up being very heavy. So, while he was leaving, I told him his wife had forgotten some of her stuff last time. I gave the package to him and he took it with him in an international flight. I wish I could see the aunt's face when she opened the package. Since that day, they never stayed at our house when they came for holidays. And the last one is titled, My uncle left trash in my car. So today, my mom and I drove my car about an hour to meet my uncle to drop off some stuff for my grandfather who lives near him. They live about 2 hours away, so we met in the middle. We met up in a grocery store parking lot to make the drop off. My uncle pulled his car up beside us, so my mom and I got out of the car to unload some things out of my trunk. When he came over to my trunk, I could see the trash from the fast food, Popeyes, he got on the way to the meeting in his hands. We all grabbed something to load into his car, and I honestly forgot about his trash. I did not think too much about his trash till I was maybe halfway back to my house. It occurred to me that I never saw him with it again, so I got a feeling that he left it in my car. He's a jerk, so it wouldn't be surprising. And sure enough, when I got home and checked my trunk, his gross fast food trash was just sitting there. I hate it when people leave trash in my car. I find it so rude and inconsiderate. I get it if it is an accident, but that was deliberate. So I was even more irritated. I decided that in order to get back at him, I was going to mail his trash back to him because I don't want it. I didn't want to give my uncle the satisfaction that he could just be a total jerk with no repercussions. I am currently at the USPS store waiting to ship this package. I put the trash in a box full of tiny packing peanuts that is marked fragile. I put a note inside with the trash that says something like, Uncle X, you left something in my car. I feel so petty, but screw it, don't leave trash in my car. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.